Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, the Edge User Group Monthly Update. Just a couple of housekeeping items while everyone gets settled. We are using the Zoom webinar platform for today's webinar, so your mics and your cameras are disabled by default. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, please use the chat function and select all panelists, and we will work with you directly to sort it out. If at any time during the webinar you have questions for our panelists, please use the Q&A function. Please note that we will be holding all questions until after the presentation. And with that, I would like to turn it over to ACRO's Deputy Director, Melanie Gottlieb.
Thanks, Annetta. I'm Melanie Gottlieb, Deputy Director of ACRO, and I'd like to welcome you today to our first of the virtual Edge User Group sessions. We know that all of you are at the beginning of your fall semesters and you're incredibly busy, so we thank you for joining us as you come close to the end of your week and head off into the weekend. As always, we're hopeful that our technology will not fail us. This is a fairly large Zoom call, and we at ACRO, like many of you, remain at the mercies of our home Wi-Fi, so bear with us if we have any technical issues. We missed our opportunity as an Edge user community to engage in person this year at the ACRO annual meeting. And so we decided to try to create a more virtual community with a monthly user group series, and we're looking forward to seeing how this evolves with all of you. During this webinar, you may use the chat freely. If you have a question for the panelists, please use the Q&A section in order to ask that question. And if you have a particular question for a particular panelist that is not just general, please make sure to indicate that in that question. With the chat, you can engage with each other freely, and we may ask you to post a question in the Q&A if we think it's a larger question that everyone might want to hear. So joining me today are two excellent colleagues. I have Drew Carlisle, who is an ACRO Assistant Director for Edge Development. When you email Edge, you're generally talking to Drew. Also with us today is Jasmine Saidi Kunert, who is the chair of the IESC, which is the International Education Standards Council, and also the founder and president and CEO of ACEI. And Jasmine, I'd like to turn it over to you to talk about the IESC.
Thank you, Melanie, and hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm here in sunny Los Angeles, and we're very fortunate that the smoke from the fires has finally dissipated. And it's a pleasure to be here today as the chair of the International Education Standards Council, and I'm joined by a number of my colleagues who serve with me on the council, but I'd like to give a big shout out to everyone. Some are here on the panel and some are just joining us as an audience. There's Johnny Johnson from formerly with Monterey Peninsula College, Nancy Katz with Evaluation Services in Chicago, Jennifer Mink with the Tarrant County College District in Texas, Emily Say with IERF, Robert Watkins, UT Austin, and Bill Paver with FCA. One of our observers, Dale Goff, is joining me today on the panel. And let's see, and we have Ann Koenig, who is our liaison with the ACRO's office. I believe I have introduced those who are also with me. So it would be Emily, Nancy, and Robert, and Dale, and myself, and Ann. We are the folks that are representing IASC today. We also have fellows. These are individuals that were selected to serve for 1 year on the IASC and are assigned a special research project. Our current fellows are Loida Utli from Texas A&M at Corpus Christi, and Rosalie Hancock with Bellevue College. And one of our past fellows, Amanda Holder, serves as a volunteer on the council, and she's with Indiana University Purdue. Just to give a quick overview, the IESC is a volunteer group of experienced professionals familiar with credential evaluations and international admissions. Those of us on the IESC have worked in higher education as well as at private credential evaluation firms. We've each authored country profiles or been part of research projects that culminated in publications sponsored by ACRO and NAFSA. So you can be confident with the recommendations that are presented in EDGE that they've been carefully vetted, discussed, and discussed even more, and they represent the varied viewpoints held within higher ed. The grading scales and credentials advice that are published in Acroedge represent a majority consensus amongst the, excuse me, IASC. That's, I think, kind of, I want to just leave that as the overview and turn the conversation back to Melanie and Drew. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jasmine. I'd like to just share with you, this will be our agenda for today. It won't be highly structured because we hope that we'll hear from a lot of you. We are going to go over a couple of our particularly favorite and we think most useful EDGE new features. We will have some time for Q&A, and we will also, if there's time, share a review of the product development timeline, because we are always working on EDGE to make it better for all of you. So before we get started, I would like to have a sense of who we have here on the call. So Annetta, if you could launch the first survey poll. So we're wondering, which part of the field do you represent? Are you institution-based staff? Are you a professional evaluator? Are you a government evaluator, a ministry or ENIC NARIC colleague? Do you work with a law firm or some other thing that we've not represented?
We'll keep the polling open for about another 10 seconds. Okay, excellent. I'll go ahead and end the poll and share the results.
Excellent. So it looks like mostly we have institution-based staff and some professional evaluators, and then maybe someone will volunteer in the chat what other segment we might have missed in this particular labeling. And Annetta, could you launch the next poll as well? And I'm just curious if you are an EDGE subscriber. I suspect most people are, but there might be some folks who have not yet subscribed to EDGE and just might be curious about what we have going on here.
All right, I'll leave this open for about another 10 seconds. All right, I'll go ahead and close.
And it does look like we have a majority of EDGE subscribers, which is as I had suspected. If you're not yet an EDGE subscriber and you're interested, please reach out to us and we can work on getting you a trial subscription so you can check it out and see if this is something you might want to commit to in the future. And with that, I am going to turn the mic over to Drew Carlisle, who is going to talk to you about some new EDGE updates.
Well, thank you so much, Melanie. So happy to be here with everyone today. Really appreciate you taking the time to just talk with us and learn a little bit more about what the new EDGE 3.0 has to offer. So some of the things that we've really tried to do are listen to your past comments. And so we really do appreciate your feedback and want to encourage you to continue to do that. On each page in Acroedge 3.0, there's actually a submit an update button. That'll connect directly with us so that you can tell us things that you identify that you think could improve the product. I always welcome any feedback, and like I said, we'll try to incorporate that moving forward. We've been told that there's so much information within EDGE that sometimes it can be possible to overlook something. So we've installed a new feature where you'll be notified about content updates that are made. These are going to be substantive updates. There's going to be mentions of new credentials, new credential advice, different descriptions of those credentials. If there's a new grading scale that's published or we've updated our suggested US grading equivalencies, that'll also be the type of notification that you will receive. If there's a new set of resources that have come out that we think would be particularly valuable, we're going to have that published over on our Consolidated Resources and Institutions tab. There you'll find resources that you can use to verify all the information that you need when you're evaluating academic credentials. So just to give you an idea about what we've actually added into Edge relatively recently, there are a significant number of new credentials that are represented in Serbia at both the secondary and the post-secondary levels. So there are descriptions on how 180 ECTS programs work, as well as 240. When you've got the integrated programs that begin and culminate 300 to 360 credits later with 1 degree. Also, when you just have a second cycle program of either 60 or 120 ECTS, we've got examples of those in as well. We've added in some new grading scales for the Bahamas, for Bhutan, and Guatemala. We've updated credential advice for the Netherlands for the Master of Arts and the Master of Science, and we've included some new primary resources for verification purposes over in Hong Kong. There's, in addition to the latest content updates, we've also added a new feature, the Emergent News. Emergent News, we're scouring the internet trying to find news stories that are going to be interesting and important when you are trying to understand the context behind the documents that a student, that a learner has presented for you. These are going to be stories that as we're going through, they're going to be tied to the country profile. You'll be able to go back and reference those indefinitely so that you can always understand what was happening during the time when a student was learning, so that you really can have a better understanding and appreciation for what their pathway was. In just a little bit, I'll actually show you how we're going to be notifying you about all of these new content updates and emergent news items. We've got a new bookmark feature, which is something that I think is pretty exciting. Whether you are incredibly familiar with the system so much that you don't feel the need to check in on it any longer, or you're just learning about a system for the first time, the bookmark feature is a way to make sure you don't miss out on any of that information. So if you'll bear with me for 1 second, I'm going to switch over and show you how you'll be notified about these new things once you take advantage of the bookmark feature. So from our homepage, which has changed from, we launched this new product in July of 2020 here, but the new website, acro.org/edge, is where you can go. And I've already logged in. I've already logged into my account because I'm assuming, like a lot of you, this is something that when I start my day, I get right into and go ahead and just open up Acroedge. Now, the way the bookmarking feature is really going to be utilized like to its maximum potential is for you to log out and log back in when you want to get those updates. So I've done my work for today, and let's just say that I'm all done. The next time I go to log back in, that's when I'm going to be notified with a banner across the top about all the new features that have happened since I last logged in. I've already bookmarked a few of the countries, and I'll show you how the bookmarking feature works here in just a moment. But you'll see right here, your bookmark countries have an update since your last login. You can either view the bookmarks through here, or you can go over to see all of your bookmarks. But this is going to be all of the changes that have happened since the last time you logged in. In the Bahamas, something new has occurred. And the new since last login, it's going to tell you when it was actually published. There's a new news item about when the school year is set to begin, something that you really might want to be looking at when you're evaluating that student's documents. Back on the homepage, this banner will remain for a little while. You can close it out if you want to. But the latest updates that we've posted in there with a general description is available. And a little bit lower are those emergent news items that are happening. Like I said, these are going to be tied to the country in question indefinitely. So you'll be able to go and reference that as you need it in the future. those were a couple of my favorite new features. I've also heard from folks that the credential search feature is one of their favorites. If you were a subscriber to Edge in the past, you know that there used to be multiple pages of credentials. And now what we've done is we've listed everything in one page. And rather than having to sort through everything, here, not in the top search bar, but down here in this lower secondary search feature, just as you begin to type in real time, it's going to shorten the list, and you can find precisely what you're looking for significantly easier. This is one that I find very useful, and I hope you will as well. So those are a couple of the new features that I really appreciate. Netta, would you actually launch the next 2 polls for us?
Absolutely. Here's the first one. All right, we'll leave the poll open for about another 20 seconds.
I'm actually pleased to see that this is a new feature for a lot of people that you're going to be able to take advantage of.
Absolutely. All right, I'll go ahead and end the polling and share your results.
So it looks like about 2/3 of you. This is something brand new that you haven't seen and taken advantage of yet. It's something that we're continuing to do research, like I said, all across the internet, finding all the best news stories that we find relevant for you. And I see that a lot of you, 80%, would be interested in receiving this information as an email or an RSS feed. We'll drill down a little bit more into what you would prefer to have, whether you're looking for information on specific countries or if this would be just a general digest. But thanks for sharing that.
Here's the second poll. Okay, we'll keep the poll open for about another 10 seconds. You guys are a very quick group in answering these polls. It's excellent. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll.
Yeah, the bookmark feature is not something that we had in previous versions of Edge, so it doesn't surprise me that this is something that you haven't yet integrated into your day-to-day. But if you use Edge for particular countries, I would recommend bookmarks. If you use it for all countries, I would recommend bookmarks. I recommend bookmarks in general. All right. Well, moving on, we can talk about some of the other content updates that we've got coming down the pike. We are going to have some new profiles that are going to really beef up the existing information for Macedonia and for Cuba. We've got the collaboration with the IESC Fellows. They're going to be finishing up their research on offshore medical schools in the Caribbean. And we've also got future projects with Russia, with Mexico, and with Palestine as well. Just to go over just a little bit more about some of the features that we've added in. The new interface with responsive design. We know you're using tablets and iPads and your phone and your laptop. We understand that there are lots of different ways that we're all accessing this information. And this is going to be significantly friendlier on all of your devices. We've opened up the country overviews, so they're open to non-subscribers, something to give a little bit of information and a little bit of context for the education system that you're trying to learn more about. Lower on the screen, you'll see that we've integrated in our Connect news and some events that Acro is putting on, so that you're more aware of how Acro intersects with the work that you're doing here. We've mentioned the personal account bookmarks. We've mentioned the country update alerts. And we also talked about those emergent news alerts just a little bit, and that credential search functionality. And then, Annetta, are there any other polls that we have for everyone?
I think that's all for now, Drew.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good, understanding of where everyone is with how they've used the new features.
So, Drew, could I interrupt for a moment? And before you move to Q&A, if you could show the credential search one more time. We had a couple of people who missed that. And if you could just quickly share that one more time, that would be great. And then we'll move over into Q&A.
Absolutely. So you can see in France, we've got quite a list of credentials here. And what we didn't want you to have to do was to try to figure out exactly which one you're looking for. So up at the top, not in this main search bar, but down in the secondary search, which is only available here on the credential section, that's where you're going to type in. And as you're going, it's going to shorten in real time as you're typing. We've only got 5 to select from here. We can figure out which back we need. Don't forget, we still do have all of your countries listed by continent. And if you find that this menu is showing up when you don't want it to, starting your mouse at the bottom of the screen and mousing up to what you're looking for is something that I found improves my user experience.
That's great. Thanks so much, Drew.
Absolutely.
So now I'd like to move to the Q&A section of the webinar. We've got a number of really great questions in the Q&A section. The first one that I would like to address is a question from John Fierstein asking about screenshots. And so that has been something that has been questioned for a long time in terms of use of screenshots when a client requests that, and you need to be able to provide it. So I'm going to put Drew on the spot for a moment, and I'm going to ask him to share his screen again and move to the FAQ section of the Edge site.
Here at the top, you'll find a list of useful links.
And I believe it might be the last FAQ right now. This FAQ, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I will let you navigate to that on your own, gives you the details on our policy around taking screenshots. The short answer is that yes, it is now allowed to take screenshots with proper attribution. And the process to properly attribute is outlined in that FAQ. And we appreciate that folks are being attentive to their user agreements and to our copyright. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Drew. All right, so the next question is, let's see. There's a question about the update notifications. Is that upon login or via email? Drew, do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, this is not integrated with your email. This is something that we have contained within Edge. We know that you're getting a whole lot of notifications and a whole lot of emails, and we wanted to be sure that this is something that you were notified when you were coming in to use this database.
Great, thank you. This is one of those features that we will probably continue to enhance and continue to ask our users what they would prefer. And so if that turns out to be something that a majority of users would want an email update, we may consider adding that to the product timeline. But that will take some additional work and probably wouldn't be for a little bit yet. Right, so another, here's a question that I'd like to direct to Jasmine. Are there plans to update the Hong Kong ladder to reflect the change from HKCEE, HKALE to HKDSE from a 3-year bachelor's degree to a 4-year bachelor's degree? Jasmine?
Yes, and the answer to that is yes. And we welcome our subscribers to share anything that they find that may be missing from the current country profiles, from the credentials, from the grading scales, from any aspect that you see in the specific country that you feel is not being addressed. Please contact us at the Acroedge admin, and then our colleagues at Acro will bring it to our attention, and then we have a working agenda of topics that are addressed on a regular basis. So Hong Kong is one. The ladders is also an issue that we've been addressing, and thanks to Acro, the ladders are being modified. We have a whole new look for them that have been designed. So you will see a lot of new changes happening to the country ladders as we go along.
Thanks, Jasmine.
You're welcome.
Here is another question about, have the sample documents area been expanded or populated? I'm particularly interested in the secondary level.
I'll jump in that too. We were very busy last year with Acro's help, who brought on board an intern to help populate the countries with the sample credentials. We have been collecting them individually as members of IESC and as well as Acro staff, and these documents have been populated within the countries. We know it's not complete, so this is an ongoing process. Again, if you have a sample you wish to bring to our attention, please share that. There are some privacy issues that we have to be very concerned about, but let us know what specific countries you feel you need to see some samples, and we will put that on the agenda items for our team to review, and then do the search and find the appropriate documentation, redact the information, and then have that posted.
Thanks so much, Jasmine. So here is another question. It says, I really like the new Edge, but I do miss the list of recognized institutions that were in some of the country profiles, for example, Brazil. Is this something that will be added back at some point? I don't know whether Jasmine or whether Drew would like to answer that question.
Well, I can speak for what our logic was when we assembled the new resources tab. As I mentioned in previous versions of Edge, we had both an institutions and a resources tab, and we wanted to be sure that people didn't miss out on any information that would be useful. So what we've done is in the resources section, if there is a list of recognized institutions for a given country or system that is maintained by an appropriate body in country, we're going to list that resource here in the key resources on the resources section. You can find, we've even tried to identify those for you labeled as institutions, and it'll take you directly where you need to so you can verify that with the most up-to-date information. If we couldn't find a resource that is maintained, we have maintained a static list, but that would not be a best practice to use when you're trying to determine what that current status is for that institution.
Thanks, Drew. I don't know if Jasmine has anything she'd like to add to that.
No, I don't. Thanks, Drew. That was very helpful.
Excellent. I see a a couple of questions about previous ACRO webinars, and so I'm just going to answer that. We have an archive of all the webinars that we have ever offered in the last couple of years, and this one will be included in it. And so if you want to access any ACRO webinar after it has been recorded, if it's one of these free webinars, you can just go to the website, navigate to the webinar section, and look up that webinar. It will ask you to register for that webinar, but once you register, you will be able to access the recording of it. So those are free. We archive them. We keep them for several years. Content gets a little old and stale, so after a while we won't. But they are free and available to you right now. Another question so I have a question here that I'm going to ask to Jasmine. If I have a credential that isn't listed, how can I determine equivalency? Specifically, I have a PBN, Post-Basic Bachelor of Nursing, from Nepal. Jasmine, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And then I also will invite either one of our IESC members to chime in. But typically the process is, if you do not see a credential listed in the country specific profile that you are searching, you do need to share that information with us, and we would appreciate seeing a sample of the document that you have. Please redact all the private information regarding the applicant that you're dealing with, and send it directly to the ACRO admin for Edge. They will then refer it to our attention for us to do the review and the background research. And then upon receipt of all of this and our completion of our review, we will then come up with the credential advice. We will vote on it, and then that information gets posted on the country profile page. If any of my colleagues on ISC wish to add to that, I invite you to
Sure, I will.
Go ahead.
Jasmine, this is Robert Watkins. And as to Nepal specifically, the nursing, we have indeed come across that in the last 3 weeks or so, brought it up once in one of our bi-weekly meetings, and we're digging a little further on it. Ann Koenig of ACRO, and she may want to add to this, has a great deal of information on this particular set of credentials and this particular discipline in Nepal, and sharing that. I'm working on it since I first raised it a few weeks ago, and hopefully we'll have that added into Edge Nepal relatively soon.
Thank you so much, Robert. I appreciate that. Let's see. I am going to answer. There's another question that is more general, asking about best advice receiving official credentials during these COVID times. Many students state they can't get official documents sent to us due to their universities abroad being closed. What is your advice in circumstances like this? And so one user actually did say to check out one of our previous webinars just this past week, where we talked about online verification for a number of countries. And so that is absolutely a possibility. And then another option that I would share with you is that if you go to the ACRO website and navigate to our COVID practices resource, and that should be under the resources section, or you could just Google ACRO COVID practices or ACRO COVID resources, and you'll probably find it. And we do have an outline of a framework for decision-making around being flexible and how you might serve students who can't get their documents right now and still allow them into your programs. These practices are practices that we would use domestically if there were a situation, say a natural disaster in a region of the country where we might have a hurricane or some other natural disaster. We have used these same practices when we work with refugee students, and these practices that have flexibility within a set decision-making process are something that you can apply in these circumstances as well. And it looks like Annetta has popped that into the chat. So I appreciate that, Annetta. It says Acro COVID guidance, and there's a link. And then there's inclusive admission practices for displaced and vulnerable students. So we hope that you will check out those resources and use them.
Melanie, excuse me, this is Jasmine. If I could just add to your response to that question, please.
Yes, please.
Thank you. The other thing that we have, I suggest is if you could search on the internet the status of the institution's operations. We have found that the campus may be closed to the individual students for instruction purposes, but the administrative offices are open. And so if a student says my university is closed, that's kind of very general. That could be closed to the individual students because there are no face-to-face in-class instruction, but the administrative offices are open and they do facilitate the release of the official transcripts. So do be sure to do that kind of due diligence before you are arbitrarily accept the individual saying that the entire university is closed. We found that that is not the case, that the schools may be closed to the students, but administration is open and functioning. Thank you.
Thanks, Jasmine. That's great. Great advice. There are, let's see. How about, do you have any recommendations in terms of best practice and weighting GPAs for certain advanced level credentials as compared to their domestic applicant peers who apply with AP and weighted GPAs, IB higher level versus standard level subjects, for example? This is a challenging question that might have quite a lot to do with institutional policy. I don't know if any of our IESC members might want to talk about that.
Well, we do tackle this issue, but I'd love to hear, I don't want my voice to be the only one, so perhaps Emily, maybe you'd like to jump in and.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I had to unmute. So I represent a credentials evaluation agency, so we don't do weighted GPAs per se, but we do make the distinction between, for example, a US high school graduation equivalency and the recommendation of advanced credit. And then when we do the credit and grade conversions, if you will, then we'll do the GPA, but we don't do a weighted GPA per se. And as Melanie mentioned, it's very likely that this will vary by institutional specific practice.
I will also jump into Robert Watkins at UT Austin. This actually came up while I chaired the NCAA International Student Records Committee, and I'm sure it's come up since. I've been off for almost 10 years now, but the issue was some coaches came forward with the idea that if you do A-levels or Scottish Highers or something that's more advanced, enriched, or whatever, in country, that should be given more weight in assessing a GPA, in this case for initial freshman eligibility, than say the lower level like GCSEs. And the answer to that is no. That is just totally inappropriate from my personal point of view, and the committee accepted that. There are grading scales, and EDGE has them for A-levels. There are grading scales for GCSEs. You need to understand where they differ, but in terms of giving more weight to one versus the other, in terms of quality and in terms of quantity, I guess quality speaks for itself. Quantity is the piece here that I think is what's important, that it should not quantitatively have more weight than other academic examinations at the upper secondary level. And with that, I'll stop.
Thank you for that perspective, Robert. That's great. I'm going to address one comment that's in the Q&A that asked about the screenshot piece, and I just wanted to answer that question and let folks know that that new policy on screenshots rolled out with the new Edge when it launched in July. So that policy is listed in the FAQs. Here's a question. What criteria does Acroedge use to determine which 3-year bachelor degrees are equivalent to a US 4-year bachelor's degree? Jasmine, do you want to think about that from an IESC perspective?
Yes. We use the principle of what is the minimum requirement for admission to the 3-year program or the 4-year program. And we also then look to see the breadth of the program as well as what it allows the individual to do in the country of study. So those are kind of the overview principles. When it comes to a 3-year degree that is after completion of a 12-year program, our standards have been to recognize it as comparable to 3 years of undergraduate study, looking at it as 1 year of full-time is comparable to 1 year of full-time education here at the U.S. institution. Therefore, we do look for a complete 4-year program after a high school completion, what is considered to be the benchmark credential for admission to the university. And in the case of some countries where there is a 13-year with external exam validation, then a 3-year plus that 13-year have been considered to be comparable to a US 4-year bachelor degree. I also like to invite members of the council that are here with me to add to that. We have Robert, Nancy, and Dale, and Emily. Robert?
Sure. Okay. I didn't want to jump in first, but here's an example. Literally in the last couple of days, and I shared this with my IESC colleagues, at UT Austin, we had an applicant with a 3-year bachelor's degree from the University of Geneva in Switzerland. And I first got granular and went into the canton of Geneva and saw that they had a 13-year system. And so therefore, one would have a 13-year high school credential and then a 3-year bachelor's degree, and 13 plus 3 matches 12 plus 4. So why not accept it as a US bachelor's degree equivalent? But as my colleagues pointed out, and as I knew in the back of my mind but wanted to not admit it, the University of Geneva 3-year bachelor's degree is accessible from any other canton where there might be a 12-year system. Therefore, the entry requirement, and this is always the key in these matters, the entry requirement is not a 13-year system only, which is certainly the case in the UK. You can't access a British bachelor's program without A-levels, 13 years, upper sixth form. So there's an example of where 13 plus 3 can be counted on. In Switzerland, not so. So that's what it is. Just like Jasmine said, what's the interior qualification to the one that you're looking at? And is it a 13-year system? If so, you can have your 3-year degree as a bachelor's equivalent. If not, you can't. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert. Emily, Nancy, would you like to add to that?
So it calls me back to a fabulous symposium that ACRO sponsored years ago when the Bologna process was on the scene. And so there are a number of things that you have to consider, especially when you're talking about admissions in the university and your own institutional policies. There's the issue of US educational equivalence, and then there's also the issue of demonstration of preparedness. So there are many institutions that may accept a 3-year bachelor's degree, but it may not be what we would regard as the equivalent of a US bachelor's degree in Acroedge, but there may be other ways of accepting that student based on the entire profile, be it placement recommendations, examinations, and whatnot. So those are separate issues, but I also did want to bring forward for consideration.
Thanks, Emily. Nancy, Dale?
I would agree with everything my colleagues stated already.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
This is Dale, ditto.
Thank you. Back to you, Melanie.
Oh, I'm wondering if this is
My
one of the
apologies.
technical
I was muted. Apologies about that. All right. Here is a question that I think is a great one for my IESC colleagues. I have a question about secondary credentials listed as equivalent of vocational high school completion in the US. Some countries, for example, Germany, may have a large percentage of students choosing vocational schools, which gives them access to some higher ed institutions in their own country. Can you give some suggestions on how to assess those credentials for university admission? And then there's a follow-up comment that says it would be helpful to have some of these added as qualifications, for example, the Meister qualification and the IHK exam passage, etc. So Jasmine, I'm going to pass it to you to think about who is the best person to talk about.
Oh, they all are. Let's see.
I'll jump
Robert,
in.
I think
Yeah,
Robert,
sure.
yeah, because you've done the German part very well.
Yeah, I think, well, from the very beginning of Edge, and Johnny Johnson, I think, was one of the ones that was, because he came from Monterey Peninsula College, a community college, was very keen on this. And that was that we needed to have those vocational and technical credentials in there. Two things I'd say. Number one, American admissions officers are often a little nervous when they see the words technical or professional or vocational. So sometimes we have to split those hairs and understand what they are. But what we like to think is that we do put into Edge every credential we come across that we see, whether it's academic or whether it's technical vocational. And so if we haven't got those in there, we'd love to hear from the field out there to tell us, hey, that you didn't add that in there. But yes, Germany is a prime example of a place where they have the so-called dual system, where at 9th or 10th grade, you can segue over to the vocational field, a Berufsschule, a professional or vocational school. You can get a completion certificate that's an academic document, but you can also get a title, electrician or something like that. And these absolutely need to be in Edge, and as I recall, they are in Edge, although perhaps not all of the titles that are used. So we certainly want to add those. As far as admissions is concerned to a university, that's going to be a university policy. Clearly, a highly selective institution like UT Austin is going to see it as high school graduation, but we're also going to say, that's not what we would admit from the local high school, so we're not going to admit them from Germany either. On the other hand, the school down the road from us may feel perfectly comfortable doing that. And certainly community colleges would have a different viewpoint. So it's really institutional policy. And try to think to yourself, and I'll leave it at this and allow others to talk, what would you do with a domestic applicant from a program like that? That should be a key to your answer, if not the full answer. Thanks.
Hi, this is Dale. If I could just add, in several South and Central American countries, you have to be careful because what you'll actually see in terms of vocational is the students have completed the full regular academic program, but also have taken a vocational or technical component. So you're really dealing with somebody who's gone through an academic program, but also have that vocational technical component added to, and sometimes that also means that they have studied longer than the length of a regular academic program.
That's a good point, Dale. Thanks.
And may I add, hi everyone, this is Ann Koenig speaking from the Acroedge staff. Germany is a country where one needs to be extremely careful looking at credentials that are translated as vocational and technical. And this is actually true of anywhere in the world, but it's very important to really do the research or consult colleagues who've done the primary research, because some of the credentials that were mentioned about Germany are not in a pathway to higher education in Germany. In Germany, there are many vocational technical credentials where one gets an employment credential, but in order to be on a pathway to get into higher education, one has to go back into the academic stream and do a certain number of years of academic study to get the credential that's going to allow you into higher education, the Abitur or the Fachhochschulreife. So that's just a caution to be careful about using native terminology, native language, and to really do the research and not just go by what you read in a second or third level research resource. Anyway, just a word of caution and also a professional development opportunity to really read the material.
Excellent point, Anne. Thank you.
So we have time maybe for another question or so. I'm going to answer a couple of technical questions here. One is a question about someone is saying that their Acroedge doesn't remember the passwords on the login page anymore, and they have to re-log in every time they need to access Acro. Will this be updated? Now, as far as I know, that's a local setting in your browser, and that is not a functionality of Edge. We did not program anything to say that it wouldn't save your password. You can generally, in any browser, have it set up to save the passwords and it can auto-fill that password. What does happen is that if you log in somewhere else, it may log you out and you will have to re-log in, but it doesn't save the password. Like, there's nothing within Edge that saves your password. That's really a local browser setting. And then I'm gonna just scroll down. Here's a good question from our IESC colleagues. We've recently had many international students submit transcripts from dean's offices at their respective colleges, but there are registrar offices in their particular schools. Should these credentials be used as official or approved documents? And I'm going to turn that over to my colleagues in the IESC.
That's an interesting question. This is Jasmine. We typically, as an international credential agency, require official transcripts that are issued by the official entity representative at the institution that does that. So, quote unquote, the registrar, the person in charge of the academic records. Documentation that we receive from professors or deans, in that case, we have not to this date recognized them as being official, but I'd like to hear from my other colleagues. We're very specific as to who is the authority at the institution that is responsible for the issuance of those documents. And
sure, I'll jump in.
Please.
It all depends, basically what Jasmine said, it does depend on who actually is issuing this and what's the situation at the institution in question. I think the clearest example of this being problematic is in the case of China, where there are parallel programs going on. There's a normal program where the registrar's office issues the documents because these are bona fide enrolled students of that Chinese university. And then you'll have students that are admitted through some sort of pathway program, often a 2+2, with a US institution or other institution abroad or outside of China. And the program is run through the Office of International Programs. And so maybe the director or the dean of that school or college is the one that's behind it. Generally speaking, try to think logically the way your US university is put together. An academic document purporting to show the grades and the courses taken by an individual should not come out of the Macomb School of Business signed by the dean, even though he's now the president of the university. In fact, it should come from the registrar. And so that's the sort of logic that you want to bring to one of these situations. Now, Alternatively, you might have a case where you have Indian mark sheets where it's no longer the original, but a photocopy that has been attested. And the question to you is, who's doing the attesting? If it's an academic official that you think you trust, like the controller of exams or the deputy registrar or registrar, then it might be okay. A faculty member, probably not, because they shouldn't be the ones that are attesting mark sheets that have come out of the exam office or out of the registrar's office. So those are two examples of how this situation might vary, but use the logic of the US methodology and then you'll probably find your way to an answer.
Thanks, Robert.
Thanks, Robert. That's really helpful. So we are near the end of time, and I have a couple of questions that I would like to ask our attendees. And so I am wondering if Annetta could launch the next couple of polls. So the first is really, was this valuable? Do you want to have a monthly virtual user group meeting where we can have these kinds of questions and conversations? We can update you on what we're planning to do. We can get some feedback from you. And it is looking like the majority are saying yes.
Go ahead and leave it open for about 5 more seconds.
All right.
All right.
Perfect. All right. Well, that's helpful. And we will schedule those. I will tell you that we had intended to, if we were going to continue monthly, we had intended to do the third Thursday of the month. But the third Thursday of the month is really problematic in the fall. So I think we're going to be taking a look at the next 3 months when we're going to schedule that. And we will get back to you and make sure that you're all aware. Could you launch the next poll, Annetta, which asks about the list? I see some comments and some questions that we didn't get to today, but I want to make sure that people understand that we have our international activities listserv, which is free to join regardless of whether you are a subscriber or an ACRO member. And it is a place where you can ask questions and get some information. And some of these questions might actually be best answered by other colleagues to have a sense of what they're doing, for example. So if you don't know how to join, if you were to go to the ACRO page and under resources, go to the useful listserv page. And in that useful listserv page, there's a long list of listservs that are available, and the International Activities listserv is one of those. And we encourage all of our users to join that listserv if you have not done so already. And I'm going to answer one last really quick question that is a technical question, and then we will get ready to close out. There's a comment here that says, prior to the change to New Edge, people had a login to Edge that was different from their ACRO login. And since the New Edge, their Edge login doesn't work, but their ACRO login does. When did that happen? So that happened when we launched the New Edge. The New Edge is fully integrated into the ACRO website. We did that so that we could take advantage of the technical infrastructure we had on the ACRO website. So your ACRO login is now your Edge login if you are an ACRO member. If you are not an ACRO member, you were asked to create a new ACRO login, and that gave you access to Edge as an Edge subscriber. So that's when that happened, and it's good to know that you were able to log in and it just worked. That was what we were hoping. All right, next slide, please. So very, very quickly, this is our Edge product timeline over the next year. We have a long list of things that we would like to do to enhance the product, but this is what it looks like for the end of 2020 and through 2021. Right now, we're working on accessibility issues. So we will have A-grade accessibility by the end of 2020. That is so that any of our impaired users will have access to the features in Edge. We're also working on an improved glossary feature, and we're really excited about that. Hopefully we'll be able to share in early 2021 what that might look like. We are actively working on our new ladders. Those ladders will be available, I would say by mid-2021, we think they'll be complete. The ladders are a pretty large project as we work to translate all of those into an updated visual format that is more useful than the current format. We intend every year to be adding more sample documents. We tend to do that over the summertime when we can hire an intern to process sample documents and input them. And I would have an expectation that we will be going through that in 2021, the summer of 2021. COVID took away our summer of 2020, so we really weren't able to do anything particularly new with sample documents, but last year we added several hundred. I can't recall how many actually, and I might have to ask my colleague Drew to tell me how many that was.
It was
Go ahead,
more than 400, I can tell you that.
More than 400, right, last summer. And we are working on double A grade accessibility, and we're hoping to have that done by the end of 2021. And next slide, we are just about the end. I would encourage you, if you're interested in research, to apply for the Gloria Nathanson Research Fund for International Education. These are micro grants, awards of up to $1,000 to support travel or other expenses that apply to international education research. And you can do things like country profiles, substantive country updates, or white papers on subjects of interest. So I encourage you to apply, and that's in the chat. Next slide. We talked about the listserv. So these are the ways that you can stay informed. You can join the listserv. You can join the Edge mailing list, which is on the Edge page, or you can also subscribe to Acro Connect. Next slide. And lastly, we have a number of upcoming virtual events, coffee breaks, webinars, new reports. Our calendar for the fall is chock full of new material because we know that you need resources and we're not able to get together on meetings. So we hope to see you online at an upcoming event. And with that, I am going to say thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to all the participants. We will be in touch and we look forward to seeing you next month at the next Edge User Group meeting. Thank you so much and have a wonderful afternoon.